Tell Senator Skelos for us that we appreciate the expedition of these confirmations. Questions, comments? Don't run away, guys. Just when they come back here. Ho, 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 ho. I'll show you how it works. This is how it works now. Ready? Your first day on the job? These people will ask questions. The easy questions I will answer. The tough questions I will defer to you. Questions, comments? Seeing no questions, okay, congratulations.
Governor, on a topic other than the swearing in that you said, I wonder if I could ask you what you would say to reports that you reached an agreement with Speaker Silver on a new ethics law.
I would say, Mr. Dicker, that we are having conversations with the Senate and the Assembly on the ethics law. As you know, a priority for me in this session will be getting ethics reform one way or the other. And we've had positive conversations with both the Assembly and the Senate. The conversations have proceeded further with the Assembly. They're ongoing with the Senate. But as I've said before, this isn't a game of horseshoes. Getting close doesn't count. Either you pass a piece of legislation or you don't pass a piece of legislation. And this is an Albanyism where...
Is there an agreement with the Assembly or is there not?
No, there is no agreement until there's an agreement. Final agreement, and there is no final agreement. We are having conversations and we are proceeding well, but there is no final agreement.
Just to follow up, Governor, on that, as AG, you urge lawmakers to give you kind of wider powers and jurisdiction to investigate public corruption. You know it's sort of limited currently in the law. Is that something you still support to widen the AG's powers to investigate corruption?
That is an issue I've supported for many, many years. I would support it now. It's different than the ethics legislation. It's not in the ethics legislation. No, it's a different piece of legislation. I proposed a different piece of legislation.
How important is it for you to see rent regulations strengthened and extended way before the June 15th deadline, like say in April or May? Many Democrats in the Assembly are afraid to wait until the deadline to reach an agreement on that.
Well, I think, let's separate the two things. It is extraordinarily important, in my opinion, that we not only continue, but that we extend the protections, the affordable housing protections, rent stabilization protections. The second question becomes a question of timing. This law is in place until it expires in June. I think what they're saying is nobody wants to get right down to the deadline and have a clock ticking over our heads that says if you don't pass it by midnight tonight, then a million families will lose their protection. So they want it done early enough so that we don't have the threat of the deadline and midnight and losing the legal protection. I think that's right. But I think the end is more important than the means, and the end is vitally important.
Back on ethics, why do you think the Speaker then says that you guys are in full agreement on an ethics proposal, and then now it's trying to get the Senate on board?
I think we have had positive conversations and significant conversations, but we do not have a final agreement.
But if the Senate agreed to what you've been talking, do you feel, though, that you have reached an accord with the Assembly? In other words, if the Senate came on board with what you've been talking about, do you feel that you're at a point where there would be a deal?
Yeah, in this business, Ken, it takes three to tango, right? I have an agreement with the Assembly. If I don't have an agreement with the Senate, I don't have an agreement. Right? I want a bill to pass. To pass a bill, I need the Assembly and the Senate.
You don't agree with the Assembly now, or do you? That was the
No, I have ongoing conversations with the Assembly and the Senate. We have had positive conversations with the Assembly. We are further down the road with the Assembly. But I want to get a bill passed, which means I need a three-way agreement. And you know how it works. When I'll be having conversations with the Senate. The Senate will want to make changes. They'll have ideas. They'll have additions to the bill. And then we have to go back and redo the whole thing.
The budget's been done. The budget's been done for a week now. You know the news business moves fast. What is your priority now?
To relish and bask in the glow of a passed budget. That is my priority. I'm going to do that for about 3 weeks, I think. We have it scheduled. It's blocked out. Bask in glow. That's the way we have for 3 weeks.
Seriously, what was?
I'm serious, Karen. I am very, very serious.
Governor, what's your reaction to a lawsuit brought on by some Senate Republicans over the prison population of the county?
It's a lawsuit that the state will defend. We have to work out who defends it. The Attorney General's office would normally defend this, an action like this. I know that in this case, the Attorney General was involved in the legislation himself, so we have to sort through those issues.
Governor, a property tax cap is a key reform for you, key measure that you're trying to get past the Senate. Now it's before the Assembly. What are you going to try to do to try to get it passed in the Assembly? And do you see that, will there be room for negotiation in terms of exemptions or potentially not being a 2% cap?
Joe, there's always room for negotiations. This is Albany. A property tax cap is very important, and it is a serious question to Karen's previous question. The property tax cap is a priority. Ethics reform is a priority, one way or the other on ethics reform. Property tax cap and rent would be 3 of the top priorities.
Governor, you spoke to the Senate about redistricting and the concern
Very feisty this morning, aren't you?
about the constitutionality of
You should be basking in the glow. It's your glow too, Mike.
We are.
Yeah, I know, I can see you basking.
Governor, though, you've spoken to the Senate about their concern about the constitutionality of a change in redistricting, and under what circumstances would you still veto redistricting lines?
We are having ongoing redistricting conversations about redistricting. I don't think it would be appropriate to comment beyond that at this time.
Prepared to veto lines that are, but what would they have to be for you to veto them?
I'd rather, we have ongoing conversations. I'd rather keep it at that for now.
We responded to complaints about the last in, first out system for teachers by proposing a sped up evaluation process. This week, the SED put out a report said that they're highly concerned about their ability to get that done even by next year, let alone this year. How do you respond?
Well, here's my first point, Brendan. A lot of the conversation on education is about funding the business of education. When you just think about the debate we had on the budget, it was about funding the business and the business interests of education. I want to shift the focus to the performance of the education system. That's why in my budget I put forth 2 performance grants. Why? Stop the funding, stop the block grant, blank check approach to funding, and start incentivizing performance. And there's very little talk of performance in education. And there's very little talk about educational achievement. In all of this discussion with all of these groups and all of the noise, it's always about funding for the industry. I want to focus on performance for the student. That's going to start with a performance evaluation system. What schools are doing well? What teachers are doing well? What methods are working well? Are the schools in Buffalo working better than the schools in Syracuse, working better than the schools in Suffolk? And what are they doing in Suffolk that they're not doing in Buffalo? Right now, you can't tell any of that. It's amazing, with all the money we've spent, you have very little performance data that actually speaks to the quality of the education process and how we're educating our children.
The immediate need of these schools to downsize or right size, in the word you put, in the face of this budget cut, now using an objective evaluation system. If SED says one's not going to be done for 18 months or more.
Well, then there's 2 points, Brendan. First, we need a thorough, statewide, comparable performance system quickly. That's the system that SED put out regulations, which we are now reviewing, okay? Second, you have a second question, which is totally different. Well, in this budget, there were reductions to school districts, and they may have to lay off teachers. Now, that's a premise that you're assuming because you're responding to what I believe was propaganda during the budget debate. The facts are these. After the restorations, the final budget, only about 19% of the districts in the state got a cut, period. Of the 19% of the districts, the cut was on average 2% and change. When you add the state cut together with their local taxes, it was 1% and change. So some districts have had a cut of net average 1% and change. I don't believe any school district that is well managed is going to need to lay off teachers to deal with a 1% cut. Also, if you're looking at teachers, you're looking in the wrong place in this education system. When you look at the education system overall, past 15 years, enrollment of students has gone down 5%. Number of teachers has gone up 9%, and the number of supervisors has gone up 30%. How do you explain those numbers? Students come down, teachers go up 9%, supervisors go up 30%. So if you have to absorb a 1% reduction, and if you're in a period of recalibration and re-engineering and restructuring, shrink the bureaucracy and shrink the management and shrink the 30% of growth in the supervisors. That's what you should be looking at.
But they have to deal with step increases and contractual pay increases. It's not administrative salaries, really. Most of the money's going to the teacher contracts.
Yeah, Kyle, I understand what you're saying. I'm saying if you have to streamline the system, let me take a step back. We're going to reduce the state government 10%. Okay? I have to deal with step increases. I have to deal with pensions. I have to deal with inflation. We're going to streamline the system 10%. When you have a 30% growth in management supervision, when the number of pupils has come down and the number of teachers has only gone up 10%, I don't know how you justify 30% growth in supervisors. And I'm saying that's where I would look if you had to find deficiencies.
One longer has talked about having to lay off 4,600, maybe more teachers. Is that just propaganda? Do you think any of those layoffs would be necessary?
We'll see what happens finally. I know there is a theory that says the city has reserve funds, as many school districts have reserve funds. By the way, Brenda, the numbers I gave you are after the reserve funds. I'm advocating that the districts use their reserve funds now. Why? These are state-funded reserve funds. They were, quote-unquote, rainy day funds. News flash, it's raining. Double news flash, it's pouring. Use the rainy day funds now. You're going to get a 4% increase next year. You know that. It's in the budget. This was a 2-year appropriation. So use the reserve funds now because you're going to get a 4% increase next year. And I would say the same thing to the city of New York.
The mayor continues to insist that they have no rainy day fund, that the figures that your administration cites are outdated, at least a month ago.
And that's the disagreement.
Your high-speed rail seems to be coming along with federal money. What's going to happen to the projects for the Tappan Zee Bridge and other transportation facilities in Bridgewood?
Well, Betty, one thing is not, they're not exclusive. And we're seeking high-speed rail money from Washington. We hope we get it. That wouldn't detract from a Tappan Zee project, et cetera. On large-scale infrastructure projects, finding capital is a challenge, given the economic circumstances of the state, and it's one that we're working through. But one is not the enemy of the other.
I understand that, but are you getting anywhere for funding for transportation projects like the Tappan Zee Bridge?
We're working on it.
I have a quick question for you. It's a rather benign question.
Is it really a benign question? Very benign, would you say?
The other questions that were asked.
Yes, because these are fairly problematic, these questions, but yes. But yours is benign. Then you can ask two if they're benign. Okay.
I wanted to ask you about, yesterday the state legislature passed a resolution urging Congress to act on the Jewish Chaplains Memorial. Senator Schumer and Anthony Weiner are carrying the measure in Washington. Since there are a lot of heavy hitters pushing for this Jewish Chaplains Memorial, do you have any thoughts on this? Or?
That's not that benign a question. The Jewish Chaplains Memorial is supported by Congressman Weiner and Senator Schumer. I don't have any, I don't really know about it. so I don't have any position. But it sounds like a good thing, and I'm sure if the senator and the congressman support it, I'm going to support it also.
Have you begun asking the state agencies to prepare for layoffs, and how long could you defer those terminations and still achieve your savings goal with only 9,800 layoffs?
We're working through a contract negotiation period with CSEA and PEF primarily. We are hopeful that if those discussions go well, we wouldn't have to lay off anyone. Your point is right, Mike. If the discussions don't go well, worst case scenario would be 9,800 layoffs. We are not implementing any layoffs. There are several more weeks we have on the calendar where we can have conversations before we come up to a drop-dead point, if you will, where we would have to go forward or not.
On the issue of the property tax cap, you mentioned something about negotiations moving forward on that. Is there any concern, though, after Senator Scullo said today that, negotiations could lead to a watered-down cap, either a raise in the threshold or some exemptions? Do you agree that negotiations could ultimately go to a 3 or 4% cap as opposed to a 2% cap?
Well, you guys continually ask me to negotiate against myself prematurely. You know my proposal on the cap, and I'm going to stick with my proposal on the cap. Do you negotiate these issues? Yes. And are there different opinions on the cap? Yes. And do you have new facts and circumstances on the cap? Yes. So I understand that there'll be a brisk dialogue, and I'm ready for it. But a cap itself is very important, because all a cap says is fiscal discipline. It is just the imposition of fiscal discipline on government entities that, without it, have demonstrated that they are capable of excessive increases. And when Ken Adams starts doing his job on economic development, I'll tell you what he's going to hear all across the state. He's going to hear homeowners say, I can't afford to stay in my home. I can't afford to stay in my home. The old question was, can you afford the mortgage? Now the question is, can you afford the property taxes? It is a major problem in this state. It tends to be more suburban and upstate, and because it's not a New York City problem, it frankly hasn't gotten the attention that it deserves, but it is a major problem.
Your Inspector General is coming out with a report, I guess, that says that there's been a widespread misuse of police official business placards throughout the state government. What's your reaction, and what kind of action might you be taking to address that?
The Inspector General, police placards actually are an abuse that goes back 15, 20 years, I'll bet, when you look. Every 9 months, there's a story on abuse of a police placard. It's one of those situations that the design of the system is prone to abuse. There are a number of specific cases of alleged abuse of police placards. Police placards are issued to state employees, elected officials, to be used when they're on official business. And they're put in the windshield of the car, and the car is allowed to park in areas. They're also used to gain admission to secure areas. A number of specific incidents were being investigated by the Inspector General. The Inspector General has reported that she believes the entire system is flawed, and that unless you redesign the system, you will have these incidents of abuse recurring. That does make sense to me, and we're going to follow the recommendation of the Inspector General and reform the system. We'll be announcing that shortly.
A question on the swearing in, if I could. Governor, when you were sworn in, I'm sure you were sworn in with an oath that ended, so help me God. Both these commissioners were sworn in with Bibles being held out, and I didn't hear that phrase used, and maybe it's not something that's new, but I can't recall it not being used before. Why wasn't it used?
It's optional. You can add it.
Not using it then?
We didn't have a conversation about whether or not they wanted to use it.
I mean, some might say you're taking God out of an oath, and that certainly to someone who doesn't believe in God, that would be understandable, but that's like a policy decision that may have been made that I think is noteworthy if it has been.
There was no policy decision. It's optional. Some people are uncomfortable saying, "So help me God." Some people are not uncomfortable saying, "So help me God." I am not uncomfortable saying, "So help me God," so I did. And we didn't have the conversation.
Governor, on a very weighty matter, there's...
So help you. All right. They are also comfortable saying, "So help me God."
Governor, there's some talk of naming, on a very weighty matter here, an official state vegetable.
These are all weighty matters today, Tom, I can tell.
This one is the most...
The weightiest.
Yeah. Sweet corn or the onion?
Ah.
You have a take on this?
A great question.
It's topical today.
And what is the question where the answer is? It's like a game show. Those are the answers. What's the
The
question?
official state vegetable.
Official state vegetable. Is it a contest of what would my thought be for an official state vegetable? As I'm looking out at the LCA, that's a very tempting question, I want you to know, but I will refrain. I do not have a candidate yet in the race for official state vegetable. It's one of the first duties, however, I'm going to ask the new Agriculture Commissioner to do the research, do the history, and find out what vegetable we could get the most mileage out of here in the state of New York.
Thanks, everybody.
There's a proposal in the legislature that would allow school districts to put off some of their payments into their pension system for teachers. What's your position on that? Should they be allowed to, should their payments be spread out allowing them to borrow essentially to put into the pension fund?
We are looking at that now. There were comparable proposals for local governments, I believe. Is this the controller's proposal?
Chief NYSCA is floated it, talking about allowing the districts to borrow about $1 billion to pay for pension contributions over 2 years. And it would
From the pension fund? Yeah, we're reviewing it now. We don't have a position at this time.
Governor, not to get in the way of any of the budget basking, but to what extent are you worried about the possibility of the federal government shutdown? Your division of the budget has said that a short-term shutdown wouldn't have much of an impact on the state's finances. At what point does it become a problem?
Government shutdowns. It always comes back to shutdowns, doesn't it? Impending shutdowns. I was in the federal government during the last impending shutdown under the Bill Clinton, Newt Gingrich shutdown. From a state point of view, I don't know. I'm not going to guess on whether or not it's going to happen. Some of the Democrats suggest today that it is going to happen. I don't know. I don't have any information on that basis. If it did happen, I think it would be of minimal impact to the state, and we're preparing for it as we speak.
Going back for a second to the
Vegetable?
How would that square with your own policy of not wanting to balance the budget requirement?
It apparently wouldn't, Bill, but we're in the process of reviewing it.
What's your opinion of the proposal being a voice in Washington to change Medicaid to a block grant program?
Yeah, I'm against that. Okay. I'm sorry. Well, we are a big Medicaid reliant state, and we're redesigning Medicaid, as you know, and we've reduced the budget on Medicaid. But when they say block grant, I hear reduced funding, and any reduced funding in Medicaid would be devastating for the state of New York. Okay, thank you all very much. Congratulations to my colleagues.